Um, Welcome to my session. My name is Megan Pusey and I am presenting on how to design tutorials that your users won't ignore. First off, I want to say thank you to the sponsors for DDDPerth, without whom this event couldn't happen. And I also wanted to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land that we are meeting on today, which is the Whadjuk people of the Noongar Nation, and pay respects to their elders past, present and emerging. So a little bit about me. I am just finishing my PhD at Murdoch University, and my PhD has been in IT and education. So my background's in education, and my PhD's all been about user research. So I'm sort of bringing that background to this talk to talk about how people learn, how our brains work, and how we can design for that better, more broadly for apps, web, games, whatever it might be, so that the onboarding and tutorial process is as smooth as possible. So bad news, I'm afraid my title is a bit of a misnomer in that we can't actually force people to do something they don't want to do. So your users may still ignore your tutorials, but we're going to hopefully show you some tricks on how to put that information into your product such that your users can find it and still navigate and successfully use your product, even if they do end up ignoring the initial tutorial. So first, I wanted to talk about working memory and how our memory works. We have short-term, long-term memory, and a working memory which helps us when we need to remember things to carry out a task. And when we're learning something new, we are using our memory. So for this task, I want to showcase to you the limitations of our working memory. I'm going to put up 11 digits or 11 numbers, and without writing them down, I'd like you to try and memorize them. I'll give you a few seconds. For those who can't see them, the numbers are 3, 1, 4, 1, 9, 4, 5, 6, 0, 0, 8. All right, got that? How many can you remember? Can you remember the whole sequence of 11? Maybe you can remember the first few and the last few. Generally, that's what happens when we try and remember things. But it's really tricky to remember irrelevant, disconnected pieces of information. And I just gave you random numbers there. So one way we can make that easier on our memory and the way our brain works is to group numbers together or pieces of information together in categories, so that instead of trying to remember 11 things, we're just remembering 3 things. And if we give it meaning or purpose, it is instantly a lot easier to remember. For example, the first 4 numbers were the first 4 digits of pi, 94.5 is a radio station in Perth, and 6008 is the postcode for Subiaco. So in that case, we have something to link it to our memory instead of just trying to remember 11 random pieces of information. With remembering phone numbers, these are made up phone numbers, we often group them in chunks. So you might mentally recognize that you're grouping phone numbers in chunks rather than trying to remember 11 or 9 pieces of information. So what that means for design is it's better if you give the tutorial or onboarding process meaning. For example, this is from Duolingo, which is a language learning app. They're asking you right at the start, why are you using this app? So they're segmenting their users and offering them a different onboarding experience based on why they're there to make it more meaningful to the user. We also want to try to avoid overtaxing the memory and just provide information just in time when it is needed. A wall of text right at the start is not the way to go in onboarding and tutorials. People will ignore that. Whereas if you provide them the information when it's meaningful, it's a lot more effective. Another example of providing information just in time, this is an app for coding a robot that they use in education for the dash and dot robots. This is the code, and you press start down the bottom left to send the code via Bluetooth to the robot. However, in this case, I wasn't connected to a robot, and it was only after I pressed the start button that this prompt appeared asking me to connect to the robot. So the information appeared at the time I needed it, because it recognized I had not connected to a robot, so it wasn't going to work. Unfortunately, people still forget things very, very easily, so you will need to remind them. And unfortunately, by the end of this talk, about 20 minutes, you'll probably only remember about 60% of what I said, and by tomorrow, that will be down to 30%. So if you have repeat users, even after being a first-time user, you're still going to need to remind them of key features or showcase new features or things that have changed within your app. This is an example of the LinkedIn app and a little tooltip that appeared when they first introduced reactions, so a new feature. But I noticed my banking app was also using this sort of thing when I logged in because they had moved one of the menu icons. And so the next few times I logged in, it reminded me that that icon had moved. So reminders for repeat users are still really important. People forget things very, very easily. Moving on to attention. How long do you think your attention span actually is? Are you still paying attention to what I'm saying? Apparently our attention spans are only about 8 seconds, some of the research has said, but I know from myself personally in this sort of one-way communication setting, it only takes about 10 to 15 minutes for my brain to start wandering and thinking about what I'm going to be buying at the grocery store that afternoon. So I have a little demonstration I'd like to show you about attention. Don't worry, it's only 1 minute and 40 seconds.
The monkey business illusion. Count how many times the players wearing white pass the ball. The correct answer is 16 passes. Did you spot the gorilla?
Anyone?
For people who haven't seen or heard about a video like this before, about half missed the gorilla. If you knew about the gorilla, you probably saw it. But did you notice the curtain changing color or the player on the black team leaving the game? Let's rewind and watch it again. Here comes the gorilla, and there goes a player, and the curtain is changing from red to gold. When you're looking for a gorilla, you often miss other unexpected. And that's the monkey business illusion. Learn more about this the monkey business illusion.
Let's skip it. So that phenomenon has been studied and is called inattentional blindness, which means even if something is right in front of you, you can still miss it, especially if you're not expecting to look for that information. So even as a designer, if you think, well, the information's all there, surely they saw it. No, sometimes users can still miss vital things even though it's right in front of them. So don't assume that everything that is on the screen is being paid attention to. One way to help design around the attention aspect is to provide information on demand, so that if a user missed that piece of information, they can always access it later on when it's needed. For example, just an example from last week for me, I was filling in an online form. It's not pretty looking, but that's not the point. Next to the fields was a question mark symbol. A lot of fields or forms do use this now, whereby I could click the question mark to find out more information about what was required in this field. So if I'd forgotten what an ACM citation reference was, I could click on the question mark and find out exactly what they were after. So I'm not having to remember that piece of information. If I wasn't paying attention and I forgot what that word meant, I could easily go and find out, and it was in context with the field. So I didn't have to go to a whole separate glossary page to find that information. Another example of this is just yesterday I opened up a new Asana account just to show you the first time user experience. Down the bottom left is a help in getting started menu that you can click, and it brings up this whole extra section on the left here with highly detailed information about how to get started or how to do certain tasks on Asana. The initial introduction just asks you what you're there for, why you want to use it, and helps you set it up and gets you going very quickly. And then they leave the in-depth stuff till later on because they know you just want to get started using the product and you're not going to be paying attention to all the finer details and features of that product at that time. Another key thing that really helps with our, I guess, lack of paying attention is giving feedback on user actions, be that positive or negative feedback. Both are equally important. So recently I was earlier this year, trying to enroll my daughter in after school care, not this after school care, but this was the form. Each field had a feedback as to whether I had filled in correctly or not. So a tick for yes, you've done this field correct, red circle with the dash through it for no, you haven't done this one correctly yet. The submit button was also grayed out and I could not select it until I had filled in everything successfully. However, in my case, I had filled everything in successfully as far as I knew, and I still couldn't submit, couldn't figure out why. I got very frustrated, tried to email and call as well to figure out what was going on. Only a few days later, just by happenstance, I was talking to someone in the school community and that after school club closed down at the end of 2020, but that information was nowhere on the website. It was still available to select as a service name, and the service email didn't even have an automatic reply to tell me they were no longer operating. So there was no feedback to me to let me know that I'm not going to be able to complete this action because that service doesn't exist anymore. I went back just the other day to get this screenshot and the service isn't on there anymore, so you can't try and enroll for it. But that, to me, I had no idea why I could not successfully complete this action, and that was very frustrating for me. The last thing I wanted to cover and talk about was misinterpretation. So in my background, I do a lot of communicating work, speaking, teaching, and anytime you communicate an idea, there will always be someone who misinterprets it, unfortunately. So these tips are more about trying to reduce misinterpretation. I don't think we'll ever be able to design a product with no misinterpretation. To start with, there's just plain bad UI. I was filling in a form the other day, 3 simple yes/no questions that I really didn't want to get wrong, but I found it really hard to tell which radio button was yes and which was no, and I was a little confused, and I still don't know. I'm assuming I picked yes, but I'm still not quite sure, and that was purely due to bad UI. So obviously testing your products on, and this was on desktop, not mobile. Mobile's often where the problems are. This was desktop. So testing your products can avoid most of these simple problems. But I wanted to talk about other issues around misinterpretation of icons. So if you have a piece of paper, I'd like you to quickly draw whatever first comes to mind for the shapes diamond and cross. If you don't have a piece of paper, that's okay. You can just imagine in your head what you would have drawn for those words diamond and cross. You can also compare your drawings or answer with the person next to you and see if you got the same thing. I've run some activities with large groups of people, and it's really interesting that these 2 really simple words can mean more than one thing, even though you think, oh yeah, that's straightforward. A diamond should look like this, or a diamond should look like this. Or perhaps if you're a young child, maybe a diamond looks like this. That's from Minecraft. For a cross, maybe if you're a teacher like me, you might think of a cross like that, but you could also think of a cross like this, or even like this. So it's possible for even very simple things that you think are very straightforward to be misinterpreted. To get around this sort of issue, the best way is to represent this information in as many different ways as possible. So text, visual and audio, if possible. Another example was I was playing a game recently and they had used this acronym RMB for one of the buttons. They did explain it in full at the start, but obviously I had not paid proper attention, and it kept taking me a few seconds every time I saw this acronym to realize what button it was referring to. It's not a common acronym. Most other games and services I use this symbol as well alongside, and immediately that's a lot clearer to more users that you're referring to the right mouse button. And if possible, audio, and if it's an audio description of text, fantastic. If it's not text, you could have even audio feedback on an action to help with interpretation. So tips on avoiding misinterpretation is know your audience, know where they're coming from, know what they expect to see, and use that. If you're not sure, use some user testing with your target audience. Even user testing on as little as 5 people can explore and show a lot of basic issues so you can get rid of them before releasing a product. And allow for error recovery, which means if users make a mistake, which will happen, allow them to undo that mistake or ask them if they're really sure they want to delete that very important file. So with knowing your audience, this happened in my house the other day, and to me and to you it might look like a glass of water with some weeds in it, which I was about to throw in the bin, but my daughter informed me it was a bouquet of flowers she had picked at the park for me, and that was the vase. So, know your audience. This symbol appears a lot lately, and to me, I had just called it the menu icon. I'm not sure if you have a different name for it, but recently I heard there was another name for it that I had never heard before, which was the burger. But what I liked in this particular, this is my daughter's school's canteen ordering system, rather than say, click the burger icon to order, which could be very confusing in this context, they said tap here with the symbol to start ordering, and the user can actually click on this icon or up in the top left corner, so both options are available. An example of error recovery is, I can't remember which service this was, but they let users know that even though they had scheduled the email for in the future, they could still go back and change the email, delete, or stop the schedule, or change the day and time, so that even though you're about to commit to a large action of sending an email to thousands of people, you could still go back and change if you had made a mistake. So in summary, for working memory, provide users with information just in time when it's meaningful. For attention, make sure you have information available on demand if it was missed that first time, which it most likely will be by somebody. And give feedback, both positive and negative feedback, or successful and unsuccessful feedback on user actions. To try and avoid misinterpretation, do some basic user testing with your target audience, not your friend in the cubicle next to you, and allow for error recovery so at least users don't feel scared to undertake an action, because at least they know they can go back and do it again. And so I guess if you only remember one thing tomorrow from this presentation, I think Celia Hoden, who is a games user researcher, puts it best, where she says, have users learn by doing, which I hope is what we have done today through doing those activities, in context and with purpose. If you'd like to do more reading on how our brains work, how we learn, and how that crosses over with user design and user experience design, these are probably my top 3 picks for books. Even though they might be specific to a certain context, a lot of what they write about is very applicable broadly in designing of web apps, games. And are there any questions? That's it. Thank you for listening. I hope you learnt something, and that's it.